There are establishments that exist not to provide comfort, but to test the limits of expectation. We often assume that hospitality carries with it a basic obligation, a shared understanding of cleanliness, safety, and care. And most of the time, that assumption holds. But occasionally, economics and indifference align in ways that strip those expectations down to their most literal terms. In such places, policy replaces reassurance, and disclosure stands in for responsibility. The experience becomes less about service and more about tolerance. The question remains not why such places persist, but how easily they are accepted, and what it means when endurance becomes the only amenity that remains.
Michael and Betty Zico own Motel 9001, a modest-budget lodging establishment located in Southern California. It was well known among international travelers for its exceptionally low nightly rate of $20. The motel attracted a steady stream of guests eager for economical accommodations, yet few anticipated the unsettling reality that awaited them behind its weathered exterior. Though outwardly unremarkable, the motel quickly revealed itself as a venue where discomfort and unease were routine. The Zicos had never regarded Motel 9001 as their primary enterprise. Behind the main motel structure, visible from the rear windows of every unit, was a dilapidated building. Inside, an expansive cockroach breeding farm operated in plain view, the insects swarming the space in numbers that defied reasonable estimation. This farm supplied an eclectic array of clients, including animal feed companies, alternative medicine laboratories, protein powder manufacturers, and vendors of insect-based snack foods such as cockroach potato chips. The motel had come into the Zicos' hands through an unusual transaction. The previous owners, an elderly couple overwhelmed by the demands of modern digital management systems and online booking platforms, sold the business at a significantly reduced price. For Michael and Betty, the motel's income was largely incidental. Their livelihood was subsidized primarily through the breeding farm. Operating the motel on site allowed them to keep the farm close to their primary residence, a mere 2 miles away, circumventing the expenses and logistical challenges of relocating to a more remote, rural location. Guests routinely encountered visible infestations. Cockroaches were observed crossing floors and scaling walls. More distressingly, they were seen crawling over beds and emerging from pillow covers. The insects' proximity to personal spaces often precipitated frantic reactions. Some customers fled their rooms screaming, their panic spilling into parking lots and communal corridors. On any given day, the motel's hallways echoed with outcries, confrontations, and hurried footsteps escaping cockroach-ridden quarters. Complaints directed at Michael and Betty were invariably met with detached indifference. The couple refused to engage in dialogue or negotiation concerning the state of the rooms. When pressed, they would gesture toward a discreet disclaimer embedded in the fine print on the motel's website and affiliated travel booking services. The disclaimer stated plainly that there was a 99% probability any room would be occupied by cockroaches. This clause effectively immunized the couple from legal or regulatory repercussions. Law enforcement personnel were familiar with the motel's reputation, referring to it internally as Motel Cockroach. Despite frequent calls from burdened guests, officers' authority was limited by the explicit policy statements. The police consequently treated most incidents as contractual disputes rather than violations of public health or safety codes. One particularly notable incident involved a group of backpackers from Europe who arrived late at night, unaware of the motel's true conditions. Upon entering their unit, a swarm of cockroaches emerged from beneath cracked linoleum flooring. One guest attempted to record the infestation but was quickly overwhelmed by the insects crawling over their hands and arms. Panic ensued, culminating in a chaotic evacuation. The Zicos observed the scene from a distance with detached amusement, making no attempt to intervene. Another episode concerned a family traveling with young children. The children awoke in the early morning to discover cockroaches scuttling across their bedsheets and pillows. Their cries alerted the parents, who confronted Michael and Betty. The couple responded by reciting the policy disclaimer and offering a partial refund, which the family refused. The argument attracted other guests who joined in expressing their own grievances about the motel's conditions. In rare moments when Betty directly interacted with customers, she displayed a studied nonchalance. When one guest expressed horror at a cockroach crawling across the bathroom sink, Betty reportedly remarked, "They're just part of the ecosystem here. They're harmless." The statement was delivered without apology or remorse. This detachment extended fully to the couple's staff, who bore dual responsibilities for both the motel and the cockroach farm. Employees were often seen wearing full-body protective suits, complete with masks and thick gloves, resembling those worn by beekeepers. The suits were necessary to navigate the dense swarms of cockroaches crawling incessantly over their bodies as they tended the breeding operations. This unusual attire presented a striking and unsettling visual contrast against the motel's worn interiors and peeling wallpaper. Despite precautions, insects frequently escaped containment. Trampled cockroaches often adhered to the soles of staff boots, inevitably transferring into guest rooms during cleaning. Housekeepers moved methodically through the corridors, gloves stained and boots marked with evidence of the farm's persistent infestation. Linens were disposed of with practiced neutrality, unfazed by the tiny creatures that scuttled from carefully folded bedding. Front desk clerks maintained a neutral front when confronted by guest complaints. Their responses consistently redirected attention to the motel's written policy, carefully emphasizing the low price point and explicit infestation disclaimer. The staff's demeanor was one of bureaucratic detachment, reflecting the Zico's overarching philosophy that infestations were an intrinsic and unalterable feature of Motel 9001's operation. The motel existed as a peculiar intersection of hospitality and agricultural enterprise, where commodification of insects as sustainable food sources coexisted uneasily with traveler expectations. The Zicos managed this tension with calculated apathy, aware that notoriety, while unflattering, ensured a steady flow of occupants willing to endure considerable discomfort for cheap lodging. Throughout the daily rhythm of Motel 9001, an unspoken tension prevailed among guests. The cockroach presence was more than an annoyance, it was a shared ordeal. Some guests formed uneasy alliances, exchanging tips on which rooms were marginally less infested or sharing makeshift repellents. Others isolated themselves, retreating into rooms with doors tightly shut and lights perpetually on, hoping to avoid unwanted encounters. Occasionally, the Zicos hosted awkward meetings between disgruntled customers and local health inspectors. These visits ended predictably, with inspectors noting the infestation disclaimer and acknowledging their limited jurisdiction. No citations were issued and no remediation was enforced. Motel 9001's reputation spread gradually through online travel forums and social media, often accompanied by vivid testimonials of vermin encounters. Yet despite negative publicity, the motel persisted with surreal tenacity. The economic rationale was clear to the owners. The convenience and cost savings of running the breeding farm on site outweighed any loss of business from dissatisfied customers. Perhaps the motel's true legacy lies in the paradox it embodies, a place simultaneously reviled and relied upon, where convenience and economy are weighed against the visceral discomfort of sharing one's temporary home with an infestation of cockroaches. Whether future guests will view Motel 9001 as a cautionary tale or testament to endurance remains undecided. In the end, the Zicos did not lose the business. They used it. And in that use lay an unsettling harmony between human indifference and insect proliferation. The motel stood as a living reminder not of what was offered, but of what was endured.